Hello, and welcome to Keep the Channel Open. My name is Mike Sakasagawa, and this is episode 40. Today's guest is writer and photographer Rachel Hulin. So last week, I wrote a new personal essay for my newsletter, which is a thing I do every so often. This latest piece was about being exhausted, about being part of the local resistance movement here in San Diego, and, about the personal costs of all that, what it means in terms of giving up time with family or time spent making things. I'm mentioning this not so much to talk about the piece itself, but rather about what happened after I wrote it. See, the thing is, when I'm writing, I very rarely think a lot about who might read the thing. I'm mostly just thinking about, what I want to say. I'm thinking about what it is I want to make and how I want to make it, what I want it to be. So, like I usually do with these essays, after I sent it out, I posted a link to Facebook and Twitter. And honestly, most of the time I hear from my close family and close friends, and that's about it. So I was surprised when some of my new friends in the resistance groups here started passing it around and sharing their own experiences with the same stuff, which obviously that was gratifying, to know that the work resonated with people. But I was just surprised because I hadn't really thought of it in that way. To me it was, more of a personal expression and not a resistance call. But in retrospect, I can see it kind of works both ways. It was just interesting to think about how you never really know what anyone else is going to find in your work or which part of it they'll latch onto. It's sort of like once you make it, the work becomes its own thing, completely separate from you, with its own life and energy that people each interact with in their own way. The even weirder thing was that a bunch of my kids' teachers saw it, and then this morning when I was dropping them off, one of them came over to me to compliment me, which, again, that's very flattering, but it also kind of took me back a second, because I always sort of assume that apart from my very close family and friends, and anybody who reads my stuff will be someone whose life doesn't really intersect with my own. And thinking about the fact that these people who I see on a regular basis, but who aren't necessarily close relationship-wise, that they might see these things, that kind of makes you stop and think. I mean, as a person who is mostly writing and making visual art from my own life, from my experiences, you can't really get away from the fact that your own story isn't entirely your own, because it touches all these other lives and stories, and that's what makes your story, really, is how other people come in and out of it, how they affect you. So if that's what your work is about, they're going to appear in it in one way or another, and that always carries with it some kind of consequence. And in this case, it was a nice consequence, getting a compliment, but it could just as easily go the other way, with somebody getting angry or hurt even. And, it really just drove home to me the sort of weight of responsibility that you hold as an artist, to make sure that you know why you're doing what you do and to make sure that it's worth it and that you're working truthfully. Anyway, on to the show. Today's guest is Rachel Hulin, whose photography I've known and appreciated for a while now, and we talked about that a bunch in our conversation, mostly about her Flying Henry series and then a bit about her 35 in 1 series, and you can find links for both of those in the show notes. But then the bigger thing is that Rachel published her first novel earlier this year. It's called Harry Hey Matilda, and it's sort of this modern-day epistolary novel. It's told in the form of emails back and forth between a pair of twins named Harry and Matilda. I had a really great time reading the book, which was engaging and funny as hell. So I do give that one my recommendation, and you can find a link for that in the show notes as well. So let's get going then. When I wanted to mention, I started up a hashtag for talking about the show on Twitter. It's #ChannelOpenPod. And so as you're listening, if anything strikes you, anything you particularly like, or that you have questions about, tweet it using that hashtag, and I'll definitely see it and chime in. Okay, so here's my conversation with Rachel Hulin. So I read your book and I really liked it.
Thank you so much for reading my book. I'm still surprised when people tell me they've read it.
Yeah. Well, why is that? Why do you think?
I have this whole theory on art making. I never consider anyone sort of looking at something I make or reading something I make while I'm making it. You know, it's like not part of the equation, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it is with me as well. I'm always kind of surprised when it turns out that anybody has actually seen it.
Yeah, and then bringing their own things to it. It's confusing.
Yeah, that is kind of a funny thing, how you can never quite predict what it is that people are going to find in your work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sometimes you get kind of odd questions.
Right, like really something you never would have considered.
Yeah.
It takes on a new life, which is interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
And sometimes overwhelming.
Yeah. So I've been aware of your work for a while now, but I never really knew of you as a writer until fairly recently. I first got to know you as a photographer. I think I was trying to, I always, anytime I talk to somebody for the show, I try to remember where it was that I first encountered their work. And I think that with yours, it was when your Flying Henry series was on Lens Scratch a few years ago.
Yeah.
I find a lot of people through Lens Scratch, it turns out.
Yeah.
But I remember being really taken with that series. And I think a lot of people probably must have been as well. That eventually became a book as well, right?
It did. Yeah. And talk about work taking on a new life, you know. That was I think such a case study in the art world /personal work / trying to make art commercial, and I learned a lot. And you know, people related to it on so many levels. And it was a strange thing. You know, I made that work. Originally, it was like postpartum work about feeling out of control as a mother. And it was like stark images of my son flying away from me and being this separate being from me. And it really quickly became like this viral thing. And then I actually sort of intentionally pushed it into the commercial realm because I wanted to make a living from my work. And that was a double-edged sword, I think, because I was able to make a book of it, but then it also sort of pigeonholed me for a minute as a mommy photographer and took on a whole new meaning in many ways. So then I had to end up writing a novel about incest to save my reputation.
There's such a condescending thing from so many people about women photographers, especially if your work, you know, has anything to do with motherhood or children or anything like that.
Oh yeah.
It's something that is always, I don't know, it kind of gets me because, you know, I make work about family as well, about my own family. And I've always been really struck by the difference in response to somebody like me, or I don't know, like Blake Andrews makes pictures of his kids or whatever. But like, I know a lot of women who make family oriented work, and the level of condescension that they get is so much greater than what I like. It's weird. Like when I make family work and present family work, a lot of times I'll have people be like, wow, it's so great that you're like a man who's like, you know.
Yeah, it's like congratulating a man for making dinner.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
It's unbelievable. It's charming, you know, like not that it's not great work, but it's like if you just change the name on some of that work, you know, it's unbelievable. Yeah,
absolutely. It's the double standard is really striking.
Yeah. It's true.
And it's so dumb too, because it's like here's an experience that everyone should be able to find some relation to, because whether or not we have kids, we all were kids at some point. We all have parents. We all have families in one way or another. It's one of the most, you know, important and formative experiences in our whole lives, and yet it gets written off as not serious somehow.
Right.
Like, what's
when
that about?
it's probably like the deepest experience humans have,
Yeah.
just to, mate and have children like the mammals they are.
Yeah.
So it's strange to like not make work about, it's like a reflection of your life.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly.
But I know many women who are really very careful, especially in social media, about even sort of mentioning that they might be pregnant if they're in the art world.
Yeah.
So people carefully guard that.
Yeah.
And for good reason. I experienced it, which was it was just very interesting because I actually have never considered myself like a particularly, even when I had kids, I was surprised to like be in a maternal space, So it was interesting to sort of be on Babbel's mommy blog suddenly, and it was a really, in a way, alienating as thrilling as it was in some ways. So, but it was good. I mean, I think it sort of forced me to think about who I wanted to be as an artist, how I was going to present myself, and I think my resolution was I'm just going to make whatever I want whenever I want to make it, and confuse people, which definitely happens, especially because I'm sort of both a writer and a photographer.
Yeah.
And can't figure it out. I just make whatever.
Yeah. But I mean, like, so aside from the fine art work, you also do like editorial and commercial photography as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've always done some commercial work to pay bills, etc. And I like that. I mean, I find that is really informing of my personal work. Mm-hmm. And I think anytime you're out there just shooting, it's like, as I wanted to talk about in the second section, it's like flow activity. It's making your brain work around images. And I find making commercial imagery is, I hesitate to use the word easy, but it's really straightforward and satisfying in a way that like doesn't use the part of your brain that overthinks.
Yeah.
And that's really nice. I really like sitting in front of 1,000 images in Lightroom of like an architectural interior and just, sort of blissing out to music and not thinking about it so much is really helpful.
Yeah. I always found that when I was doing more commercial photography, that it was less like the reason I found it easier was because it was less like I was trying to create something from scratch and more like just solving somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
So, that when someone else is setting the parameters, it just really simplifies everything.
It does in a lot of cases. Sometimes I feel like I overthink how someone's problem needs to be solved, so then the work isn't sort of as dynamic as I want it to be. Mm-hmm. There are some people who make such incredible commercial work and it really I see them pushing themselves creatively and they're able to work in that construct. And I feel like that's not quite the case for me. And that's why I haven't pushed really really far into that world on purpose because it's just not my best work. Mm-hmm. I could definitely make my best work on my own.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where everybody's got things that they're good at and things that they're not.
Yeah.
And, like for me, I was when I used to shoot a lot of like family portraits and stuff. And there was some, that could be fun because, I like being around kids and stuff like that. And it's always nice, when a client would be like, oh, these are great. I'm so happy with this. And that's very validating. But,
yeah,
I would never feel like, I don't know, this is like really what I'm supposed to be doing. There was always some sort of like level of disconnect. And I think that at least for me, like I never felt like my clients could see that in the work, but I always felt like I could. I
feel this exact same way. It's sort of like, it's like a simulacra of myself making the work. I felt like this is why like I never like this is why like at jobs like I always am like it's like acting out the role of someone you're supposed to be, and like so the pictures like look fine, but they're not like breaking down any barriers for yourself in an art making way.
Yeah.
Like here and there you get like a happy accident. But.
Yeah. Some people really, really are into it though. Like
yeah, it works so well for some people.
Yeah. I always find myself a little jealous of those people.
I know. But, everybody's got angst about something.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, the parameters of a project can be helpful or not.
Yeah. So, so I guess like, one thing that I was thinking about, because I liked your book quite a bit, and I've liked your photography for a while now, and I'm always really interested in people who do more than one thing. I mean, I guess I should back that up a little bit. Like, I'm actually equally fascinated by people who do more than one thing, and by people who like only do one thing to the exclusion of everything else. I find both of those things really interesting.
Yeah. I've always tried to like become the other kind of person. It seems so great to just be like, this is my thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny because
so easily translatable, but I guess it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. There's something about that when I talk to writers who are just writers or photographers who are just photographers, and they seem so focused, like they can really just know what it is that they're doing and why and how, and I don't know. There's something very like very envious.
I would niche it down more. Like, what about photographers who only take pictures of like water? Like so.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do you do that? Like, there are some people like in every field who just do the same thing again and again and again, and they do it really well.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm jealous of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the movie Jiro Dreams of Sushi?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. There you go.
I watched that movie and felt like, wow, this is a guy who just does. Man, he just doesn't think about anything.
Right,
but
it's like,
sushi.
how is this not a little tedious?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I sometimes find myself getting bored with stuff, and so I just end up doing something else for a while.
Yeah, or I'll see people very successfly promote the same project for 5 years, and I'll second guess myself. I'll think like, wow, should I have been? I could have stayed on Flying Henry a lot longer, but it just gets sort of bored. I get bored hearing my own voice around something.
Yeah, and you feel like you wanna stretch yourself some more.
Yeah, It's just like, as soon as I start to promote something, I feel like deeply over it.
Yeah.
It's like the worst,
It's not like...
I'm like, what book? Like, sometimes I'll read back passages of Harry and Matilda. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
I had to like spend a year. The process of publishing is just endless. Like, spend a year after you sell it. First you like write the book. I wrote the book in like 2014.
Mm-hmm.
Then I spent 2 years trying to sell it. Then you sell it. Then you have to edit it for a year. And I went back reading these things, and I'm like, who wrote this? And then I would be like, this is kind of like icky, this part. Like, like email the publisher, like, I'm going to take this part out. So yeah, it's really interesting to like, see your former creative self and have to grapple with it in like present day.
Do you find that revisiting your photographs for editing purposes versus revisiting your writing for editing purposes, do you find that those feel very different, or do they feel similar to you?
I think they feel similar, and it depends on the day that I look at them. And so either I'll reread, like I will also reread the book and be like, how did I ever write a book? I'll never write another book.
Mm.
I can't write 300 words right now without like sounding trite and horrible. So it's like either deeply awful and intimidating, or I'll think it's terrible. And I often go back through my archives of photo work too and think, God, that was terrible, or, well, I'll never make a good picture again. Although I will say my relationship to photography is far more forgiving than my relationship to writing, and I think it's just because I've done more of it. Like, I have my 10,000 hours in photo.
Mm-hmm.
And writing, I'm newer at. I was always more intimidated by it. For me, it's harder to do well. Like, I can make like a decent photograph pretty easily. But writing is harder. It's more, you have to really dig on it.
Yeah. It's funny because like I end up when I try to read back, when I try to edit something, I mean, a lot of times I try to get everything exactly right in the first draft. Because,
I know that's the worst.
Yeah. But the reason I do end up doing that is because I know that if I have to read it back over, that it's going to be, yeah, it's just going to be, I'm just going to hate everything and hate myself. And it's like, and
I have that exact problem.
yeah,
Right now, I'm trying to think about writing in a really different way. Like I'm trying to outline things and just think about plot and then just like worry about like literally don't write any words until you like know exactly what's going to happen. And, but it's painful, you know,
yeah,
because then you go back and you read your notes and it's just like, it looks like another language
yeah,
and there's no beautiful sentence to sort of catch you.
yeah,
Yeah. And that's why, I mean, people say it again and again that like perfection is like, like just make something decent, you know,
yeah,
like perfection will keep you from writing anything. And it's
yeah,
true. I think, I've been trying, but I'm failing currently, but I think writing 1,000 words a day on anything is extremely helpful. Just anything.
yeah.
I have like sat and written the same sentence over and over and over just to get my 1,000 words. It's just like someday I just like can't do it every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's the problem.
It's funny. I find that when I I mean, well, first of all, like I wish I had that kind of discipline. I always want to be one of those kind of people who are just like, yeah, just sit down and do the thing, and then it'll be done, and then you can come back and polish it later or whatever.
Right.
And you end up getting really blocked up,
Yeah.
trying to make it right the first time. It's funny when I find that when you said that you're more forgiving of yourself when it comes to photography, like I often find that when I finish something, whatever it is that I finish, that immediately after I'm done with it, I hate everything about it. And then when I'm
You let it marinate a little bit.
yeah, like with the photographs, like when I come back to them maybe a year later after I'm like, if I finish a series, I'm like, God, the series sucks and I hate it, but like it's done and I'm going to be done with it and maybe I'll start marketing it and move on or whatever. And then like I come back a year later and I look at it and I was like, you know what, this is actually not terrible.
Yeah.
But with the writing, like I never can come back and read anything that I wrote. Like,
Interesting. It's too much. It's too much.
yeah,
It's not. You just always feel it's bad.
it's not even that it's necessarily bad. It's just like it takes so much more effort to to make myself revisit my own writing.
It's interesting. There's something about writing. It's like connected to a part of the brain that's so visceral and in the present that more than images, which are much more atmospheric and sort of mood oriented, it feels like it's immediately irrelevant to where you are now. I feel like it's about the passage of time in a way. Like when I was a kid, like I used to try and keep journals and it was so painful because it was just like that. I remember as a 10-year-old trying to go back and read just the week before and I was so embarrassed for myself.
Yeah.
It was excruciating to sort of see where I had been. So there's something about it and photography is more, it sort of like pinpoints nostalgia in a way that's not excruciating.
Yeah. It's funny because in a lot of ways, like, you know, when you approach a photograph as a viewer versus approaching a piece of writing as a reader, like the immediacy of like a photograph, you can take in all of a photograph in like a few seconds.
Yeah.
And there's something, I think a lot about how different art forms, like how you experience different art forms, like whether it's a photograph or painting or you know, a poem or a novel or a piece of music or something, and how each one has its things that sort of, what's the right word? There are things that each one it does immediately and things that each one kind of has to, like, you know, that remains outside the grasp of that thing. And I don't know, I always, you know, as someone who wants to try and engage with multiple art forms, it's kind of weird how that plays, you know. There was a thing in your book where, like, at several points, you've got Matilda kind of talking about, you know, writing versus photography, and I was just like every time that would happen, I'd be like, yes.
I feel like I want to just write like a book on creativity because it's sort of what I was trying to do through her. Yeah. She thinks so much about that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, at times it felt like I was reading stuff from two halves of my brain, my own brain.
That's awesome.
And I just really, I don't know, there was something really, really, satisfying about that.
Ooh, I like that.
But so like, where did this all kind of come from? Like what, I mean, and this is kind of a dumb question, I guess, but like what prompted you to even want to write a novel?
Well, back in 2000, ballpark it, 8, I was so the economy crashed and like I was working as a photography writer for, a stock company. At that point, I had been a photo editor at many different magazines. And I was just, unemployed and sort of lost. And to pay the rent, I was shooting weddings. And it was just ridiculous. Like the sort of scenes I'd encounter and the drama of it. And at that time I was really bad at shooting weddings, or at least very anxious about it. So I felt all this upheaval around it. And I was always telling these anecdotes over drinks to friends in Brooklyn about shooting weddings. And so then I was like, well, screw wedding photography. I think I'll just write a novel about wedding photography because it's so funny. So then I, pitched a literary agent, and she was really excited about the idea. And so I set out to write Bridget Jones meets wedding photography. And I toiled away at it for a year, and I couldn't. This is me working within a construct where suddenly you have someone waiting on you for something. And it was awful. I couldn't write a novel, it turned out. I couldn't figure out what voice I was writing in. I couldn't figure out my characters. The whole thing felt really stilted. I was like, oh, I'm not actually a fiction writer. I had been writing for this blog in first person, sort of a similar voice as my own, but not really, a little bit more naive. And in 600 word increments. And that's where I felt comfortable. So I just on the side started writing this angsty character named Matilda. I just started a blog for myself. I had a password. No one knew about it. And she would write to her brother, Harry, and he would write back a comforting thing. So it was sort of almost a diary for myself of what I was going through. And then on one of these really disappointing calls with my agent where she was going to dump me, I think, she was suggesting other agents. It's never a good sign. I happened to send her Harry and Matilda, and she was like, why don't you write this? This is alive. Compared to the other thing that was the great idea in quotes, this is the thing that actually feels real, like your heart is in it. So then I did that. It took me a long time though.
Yeah.
I had 2 kids, so that slowed me down a little. Then I did Flying Henry and got pigeonholed as a mommy photographer.
Yeah.
And then I dug it up, and I was like, I'm just going to make that because I really loved it. And I think that's the best feeling ever, is when you just really love a project and you get to drill down on it. But it's like any of these things, you can love it and work on it. And I very, very almost went into a drawer forever. I showed it to a lot of different editors. I had to be extremely persistent about it. I rewrote it twice. I created the website for it, which is still my favorite part of the project, which was making photographs for it, and then making basically what is a trailer for it was so satisfying and happy making to just put the words with the images. So that was a very good discovery. So that's sort of how it came about, and by the time something is published, it's wow, it was really the experience of making that was the satisfying thing.
Yeah.
And then to have, someone be like, I read it. And you were like, what? What? And it's amazing, what they let me put in there. I mean, there's things about ovulation. And I mean, even some of my Amazon reviews are like, there's talk of menstruation in this book. And I'm like, there is. What was I thinking? Like a major publisher like took me on. That's hilarious, you know? So
I think that that's like one of the things that's really appealing about the book is that it has that's like the word I want that's coming to mind is sort of confessional, but that's not exactly right because it's not like when I think of something that's confessional, I think of something that's sort of aimed at the reader, whereas this is a conversation between two people, but there's like it feels very authentic. Like
right.
yeah. Like there's like there were so many times when I would be reading this thing and read something that one or the other of them would say that would relate to you know the stuff that Matilda writes about because she also is a wedding photographer at times. I thought that it's funny to hear you say that because the wedding photography book actually ends up in there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I did take a lot of that book and fold it into this book, which was helpful. You know, you could see.
Yeah. But like it's one of these things where I've had a lot of conversations with photographers at different in different venues and then on the show and like a lot of the things that she would write about photography and photography clients and different kinds of photography and stuff like that were like exactly the kind of things that people would say over drinks, but like would probably not say out loud.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, but it felt like really, like, just really authentic. Like, yes, this is exactly the kind of thing that these kind of people talk about. And that also gave it a level of sort of intimacy that was really, I don't know, I just enjoyed quite a bit.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's why it's so hard for me to, you know, I've tried several times to just write a book, a commercial novel that will sell. And I have like a list of really good commercial novel ideas. They're like right on target, but I can't write them because I feel like it's not authentic. The characters won't be authentic if I don't know them to some extent, having lived in a similar situation.
Yeah.
It's like you see people write historical novels and I'm so in awe of that because I don't know how you would embody somebody that you don't know.
It's an interesting thing that I always I've mentioned this a couple times before. One thing about podcasters is I've noticed that people who talk on podcasts have their things that they come back to over and over and over again.
Yeah.
and I guess one of my things is thinking about different modes that artists work in, where I have this sort of like grand classification of people who observe things and people who construct things. Mm-hmm. And I have never, ever been good at constructing things, either as a photographer or as a writer.
Interesting.
And it's interesting to hear you talk about, you know, having difficulty around experiences that aren't ones that you're more intimately familiar with. Because, like, even when I think about your photography, to me, there are elements of both your photography and your novel that are kind of doing both, that are kind of like straddling that sort of division between observing and constructing. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So it was just, I don't know, that struck me as you were saying that.
I like that. I think constructing's hard.
It is.
I mean, Flying Henry was probably as, you know, deep into constructing as I got. Mm-hmm. And it was fun. It was like collaging. It was like really got into the collaging concept of that.
Yeah. But even in like the other series, because like I very rarely know all of someone's work, but like your because I remember seeing your 35 and 1 series as well.
35. Yeah.
And that one too, like I feel like there's, and I guess this is more on like a technical level than on a strictly, I'm not sure what the right word, creative's not the right word level, but whatever. Where like some of those images are, they seem to be very, taken from life, like sort of just moments that you captured, whereas some of them, particularly the self-portraits, are very obviously ones that are more constructed. And so, I mean, I don't know, it has seemed to me that in all of these things, whether, that your work that I've seen, that you are sort of doing both of those things in one way or another.
That's true. Yeah. And there's a lot of power in that. I mean, I think that I've come to that sort of recently, trying to construct things more and have it still feel authentic.
Mm-hmm.
I feel more comfortable with it a little bit with photo. Because like on basic levels, I'll be like, I want to make photographs. Like right now, I really want to like make blue photographs with like Yves Klein blue, and like I just like craving it so much, that color. And I love the feeling as simple as just like being in love with a color and wanting to have that color in my life more. So, I'm sort of going out, trying to shoot still lives and make constructions there on with that color now. But with photography, I mean, with writing, it's harder. It's really harder. As I was saying, I have all these sort of great ideas that I try to make, and then they don't come out authentic or whatever. So, I mean, I find more with writing, it's like the Harry Matilda thing. It's like you sort of have to wait for it. So I'm just going to try and be somewhat patient. But I've also I feel like there are techniques that people use that I'm interested in terms of construction. Like, in terms of writing, like screenplays are so much about like things happen, like the catalyst happens on page 12 of a 110-page script. And then like at page 25, you like break into two plots. And then at page, 55, like is the midpoint of your story, and the midpoint should mirror the first opening thing, so I'm also trying to like learn to do things that are constructions in a way to sort of free myself from the overthinking of just making something out of thin air that is only authentic. And I think some people love that and are very good at it, and some people like me deeply resist it. Although I think it will be good for me in the long run, because it's just like a skill set. And I find that with a lot of things. Like technology has always been a barrier for me. Like I've learned all the technology, but it took me years to be like, okay, I'm going to learn Lightroom properly. I would always just do image by image in Photoshop, even when on a commercial shoot, because I was intimidated by it. But I think learning structures can be super helpful in that way, even on a software basis.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
There's
I actually read, this was, oh God, I can't remember who wrote it. There's some pulp novel writer from the 30s or something would write these hard-boiled detective stories that apparently published 100 of them, and had this secret blueprint for every story. And I'm going to have to see if I can dig that up and stick it in the show notes or something.
I have a huge Post-it on my computer right now that says, find a template, set yourself free, figure out how to do it and then copy it. Such a joke. I never do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm so in awe of those people.
Yeah.
That's exactly I really wish I could just churn things out in that sort of way.
Yeah. Do you find that, I mean, I always think that, one thing that photography really teaches a person how to do, at least if you are doing a certain kind of photography, is to be able to look at a scene and notice the details.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like that, I mean, I guess I don't have a lot of examples of photographers who then go on and write novels, but but it was something that I was sort of thinking about as I was reading your novel, that the level of detail that was in it, the sort of specificity of these characters, and I was sort of wondering if that, I don't know. I mean, I was just sort of thinking about how those two disciplines sort of might play together, or maybe if it's just a kind of thing where, because of who you are, that's the kind of thing that would come out naturally in both ways,
I mean, I think one of the things that, I mean, I love photography, and it's like voyeurism and what it allows you to notice. And one of my favorite things about writing is, or just life, is like describing a person. When you're just like talking to a friend and describing a person you met on the street, and it's like my favorite game, Like, he's like Brad Pitt if Brad Pitt like never became famous and like went to the University of Kansas and then got into peyote for a while and then became a professor at University of Arizona, but then was fired because he like flirted with a student, but really the student made too much of it. And then, like he surfed for a few years so you can like see it in his face. Like I love that. And I could do that all day long. So, I don't know what that means. I and also sort of culturally, like, I think in another dimension, I would be sort of a culture editor because I just also like to see what everybody's talking about. I find like really fascinating. Like, I find it really fascinating that everybody's obsessed with like the same color of pink right now. Like, I feel I feel it's like the whole rise of the resistance is like a really interesting phenomenon. It's somewhat obvious, but like, a year ago I had a futurist female shirt and everybody thought I was sort of weird. And now it's like, it's so in the zeitgeist and they're everywhere, and I find that kind of stuff really fascinating.
Yeah.
And it all changes so quickly.
Yeah.
And just watching it is like such a show. I mean, that's why like the internet is so dangerous to me. It's just like, whoa, it's like this constant movie. And now everybody's talking through it on Twitter. It's like almost too much, I can hardly take it.
Yeah.
And you have to be careful because it's a little intense sometimes, but,
that's putting it mildly.
I know it's really intense. The book world is really intense. I found out.
Yeah.
Yeah, really competitive world. I thought that, I was like, oh, I've had enough of the art world. Everyone's so intense. And then I'm like, let me publish a novel. That'll be better. I'm like, what's left? TV? I'm just going to like keep going like from thing to thing, finding out it's really intense and then like being 90 and giving up. I don't know. It's really funny. It's like, you both have to take yourself seriously and not take yourself seriously simultaneously in the right way.
Yeah. 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 Twitter can definitely lead you down a rabbit hole. That's for sure.
Yeah. And it's a lot of posturing but it's also really interesting.
Yeah. It's funny how I always find the thing about social media and Twitter in particular, how, there's this really, what I find to be a very fascinating intersection between behavior that is like almost entirely performative with behavior that is like painfully earnest.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. There's something to that.
There's something to that. There's really something to that. In fact, I've like created like 17 Twitter accounts, like with the idea of like just being a character, which I think is really interesting. But then it seems cruel because of all the earnest people.
Yeah.
And I sort of exist there in that space a lot. Like I feel like my photo work is really earnest. Like 35 and 1 is so earnest. It's like painfully earnest, but sometimes you've got to make that work or, like if I'm doing self-promotion, it's so painful because it's from an earnest place and it would be so much easier if I could just be sort of, it's like Beyonce has her Sasha Fierce identity. I think like Matilda mentions that. So I often sort of want an avatar And it's also sort of why I'm like trying to think about how I could maybe move into like promoting other people rather than promoting myself. But I don't know. I think about this a lot.
Yeah.
The earnestness can be really tough.
It can. I mean, I also think that the flip side of that is that, that when you make yourself, like when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, especially if you're doing that in your work, that, like I often feel that the best work, the work that I connect with the most, is the work that, where I feel like the artist has like some skin in the game, like they have something to lose, and that really only comes about through some form of vulnerability.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I really liked your 35 in 1 series quite a bit. There was a lot in there that, I don't know if earnest is exactly the word that I would use for it, but there's certainly a tenderness to it that, I found that, very resonant, like I think there's something, I mean, we've used the word authenticity a lot, but, I think people can tell, like when the audience can tell when there's truth in it, in the emotion. And I think that's often meaningful, and it's meaningful to me at the very least,
Thanks. Yeah. A few of those images do it for me and feel like they got where I wanted to get.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's true about the best novels too. It's like you have to really like put yourself on the page a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in sort of the genre I'm in, I would say. And that's where books are really successful, is where, because I think people want to know authors. I think they want to feel they're vulnerable. I feel like they sort of want to be friends with them. Just as when people watch TV shows, it's like you want to watch a show that for an hour, you want to like hang out with them. Like I really like the show Transparent, not because of like the social message, but because I like really think they're fun to hang out with, like those folks, and I would hang out with them. There's something to that. And yeah, I mean, I think I see a lot of clever, pretty photo work now that has no skin in the game.
Yeah.
Like zero.
Yeah.
And I sort of like it on some level, but I'm like, you're making like shapes with vellum, and it's pretty. Like it's really pretty, but I know that you're doing it because like you feel a trend. I guess in a way, like feeling a visual trend is itself authentic. Like I want to make blue images, but they're going to be about something, I hope.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I think they'll be about, the strange city I live in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you can feel it. And I think vulnerability is really helpful as long as it doesn't wear you down as an artist, or it's not, it can be, you sometimes need like a little bit of a recovery period in between projects. Or like make a vulnerable project and then like make not vulnerable things. And that's where like I find the commercial work helpful.
Yeah.
It kind of pulls you out of that.
Yeah. So we should probably go to the second segment. So why don't we take a little break and then we'll come back and do that. So for the second segment, I always ask the guests to bring a topic of their own, and it can be anything that you want to talk about. So what would you like to talk about today?
So I wanted to talk about flow, which is, as I see it, like the way to turn part of your brain off and just get into the process of making. Mm-hmm. As a writer, if you can just sort of lose hours, and, Oliver Sacks would say that this happened. Oliver Sacks has said this several times, that his books, like he would toil over them for years and they made no sense. And then like suddenly he'd wake up in the middle of the night and know how to do it. And then it was like taking dictation, it was just coming from a subconscious part of his brain. And, I was saying how in college I would lose hours in the dark room, and it was really satisfying feeling not sort of overthinking what you're making. You just get into the process of making it. And people have used all sorts of tricks for flow. You know, there are activities that are very flow worthy, like archery or surfing or knitting, that you sort of do automatically that I think are helpful to creative people. So I wanted to talk about if you had any thoughts on that, or if you talk to anybody else who has sort of little tricks up their sleeves in terms of getting into flow.
Yeah. I mean, for myself, one thing that I find really interesting is that the way that I approach different disciplines seems to they have different entry points for me. Like so far in sort of my creative endeavors, I've sort of done sort of three things. I write, and then I do photography, and then I also have recently been doing handmade books, artist books.
Oh, cool.
And each one of those things, I feel like there is like a really different entry point for me. Like when I'm shooting for with my photography, like I very rarely find myself in a situation where I feel like I'm forcing it, at least in the shooting portion of it. Whereas I very rarely find when I'm writing that I am not laboring over it. Like writing is just really not for some reason. And it's funny too, because like writing is something that I started first earlier in life. It's the only thing I have any training in formally. And I'm also like, it's the kind of thing where I'm thinking about it all the time. Like here's the thing I want to write, and here's how I would write it, and here's the things I would say. But then when it comes time to actually sit down and do it, then for some reason it ends up sticking a lot.
Isn't that the worst?
Yeah.
It's like the Pinterest cakes where they show like the Pinterest cake and then the cake that you try to make. And they're like vastly different.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have so many books in my brain I can't get out. They sound so good.
Yeah.
When I'm driving, I like email myself.
Yeah. Oh, it's the worst.
It's the worst.
But it's funny because like when I'm shooting, and partially this has to do with, I think the way that I shoot tends to be very taken from life. So it's more like I don't start shooting until something catches my eye. But even then, like I have done things for projects before where I've gone on a shoot day. Like I had a series where I was visiting my hometown, which I no longer live in, and it required me, because I don't go there for any reason other than to take pictures now, because I don't know anybody there anymore. So it requires me to actually go there on purpose to take pictures. And even when I'm doing that, there's just something about the way that I shoot. I'm waiting for something to grab me, and then once it does, I can sit there and maybe work a scene for a little bit, but it's not hard, it just sort of happens.
Yeah.
That never happens with writing.
I know. It's hard to catch it.
Yeah.
It happens to me every few years.
Yeah. And then with the books, what I find is, and it's sort of in between, where with writing and bookmaking, that what I find is that I have a really, really hard time just getting started and in the initial stages, the planning stages, because like with a book, I have to actually go out and like I'll have to make several versions. I can't just like sort of toss it off quickly. But I have to, sort of plan it out a little bit more. I have to experiment, and then I have to go out and, go to the art store a whole bunch of times and get new materials because those old ones didn't work. But then by the time I'm actually setting down to do the thing, there's a sort of mechanical process to it where like some of these books, I might want to make an edition of like 5 or 10 of them. And the process of actually sitting down and making the thing, once it's done, like once I've planned it out and have sort of figured out what I'm doing, then just doing it. Like I can like watch TV while I'm doing that, and I can just sort of zone out and stitch,
Right.
And that can be like really, really satisfying.
Yeah.
Even though I'm terrible at working with my hands. But like, I mean, what about you? Like, are there Because I've honestly never found any tricks for myself that really work.
Yeah, like if I'm having a tricky writing thing, I'll just like write 1,000 words on anything. Usually it's like I can't write, and then I'll go for a drive. Like I find like walking, driving, taking a shower, doing like a little bit of yoga will sometimes like knock something free. But when you're anxious about like not creating something, it's hard to get in your physical body. But I'm really trying to do more of that. I'm interested in athletes and like how there have been studies about athletes who are sort of delusional about their athletic prowess, and the more delusional people do better in sprinting and swimming. So I'm sort of interested in that sort of mind-body connection and how it could be used for creativity.
Yeah.
I'd like to be like really delusional. Like actually I was like, just accidentally passed a hypnotist's office yesterday, and I was like, what? Could they like do hypnotism for artists where it's like they just drill into your brain like, you're good enough. You can write this. Like you have more projects in you, rather than, because I feel like part of like the hilarity of being an artist is like they've created brains for us where we always revert to, oh my God, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
I can't do this. And then you get stuck.
Yeah. I saw this hilarious, like Venn diagram a couple years ago where it was, on one side it was, absolute narcissism. On the other side, it was, crippling self-doubt.
Self-doubt.
And then
in the middle is artist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really
crazy.
true though.
It's true of everybody.
Yeah.
Every artist.
I have yet to meet anybody. Well, actually, that's not true. I know one writer who just has no insecurities at all. And the way he describes it is that he's chemically immune to fear. He actually thinks that there is like some like brain mutation or something in him where he just has no ability to feel that. So
I want that.
Yeah, always
my
envy
next
that.
book is about taking like a no fear pill, of course, like because oh my God, it's crazy. Like what are we afraid of?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I always say to him, like, not everyone gets to be chemically immune to fear. And he said, you should really try it. It's really a better way to live.
It's a much better way to live. I know people with like Post-it notes on like everywhere that are like, what do you care? You're going to die anyway. It's like, just do something that's okay and sell it, move on.
Yeah.
And I'm so ready to just feel like somewhat confident in my craft to just make things and move on. And I would say that I'm very close to that in photography, except that it doesn't scratch the itch in the way that like good writing does. Like it's just not enough.
Yeah.
And it's hard to make a living at it unless you're like getting that itch scratched by commercial work.
Yeah.
Which I'm like an okay commercial photographer. I'm never going to be great at it. Like I would really like to be great at like some portion of what I do in life.
Yeah.
So that's frustrating.
I don't really think that anybody ever ends up feeling like they're, except for maybe this one guy, feeling like they're great though. Like I don't know. I remember I was reading Sally Mann's autobiography a year or two ago, and the stuff that she was writing about, like, feeling like she was going to be all tapped out, or, like there was this line where she said, like, I'm always so worried that I'm never going to have a good idea again. And then,
right.
Everyone around me is like, oh, you'll come up with something. You always come up with something. And she feels like, no, you don't understand.
No, that's what people have been saying to me. And I'm like, no, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
That was all I had. That was like 8 years of my life. Like I haven't done anything. I've just been like, breeding. So.
Wouldn't it be nice to just be able to feel like some sense of contentment with the things that you already have done?
Yes. In fact, my stepmom told me a couple weeks ago when I was stressed out about this, she was like, can't you just like bask for like a month? And I'm like, bask in what? My failure? I felt like it was like the most short-sighted comments anyone has ever made to me. And then I was like, I'm a horrible person. Like, just chill out. No one cares,
Yeah. But I mean, just about everybody,
one cares.
every artist that I've ever met, like, we all do that, like, I don't know.
I know.
That was,
it would be interesting to pivot to like, And when I was writing about other photography, I was good at that, and it was really satisfying to champion other people who I think are great and sort of underserved or a little too humble. You know, that really intrigues me. My wheels are turning on how to do that.
Yeah.
In a way that's mutually beneficial.
Yeah. Well,
I
and
guess
it's
you're
funny.
doing it to some extent.
A little bit. I mean, I tried to, but like to that point, like it's funny how, for me, this show and some of the other things that I do online are like really explicitly for me. Like, I mean, they're fun. Like I like talking to people, but it's also like an explicit part of it is to sort of, find a way to support other artists who I think, who I find interesting, and I think what's interesting to me is that, and I know this isn't just me, like, cause I've talked to a lot of people who do the exact same thing where it's like really, really easy to look at other people and say like, why are you so insecure? You're great.
Right.
Like, look at that thing that you did. That thing is fantastic. And then like, nobody is able to turn that around and be like, hey, look at this. I did the great thing. Like, that's fantastic.
Yeah, no one can. So interesting. Or they will and be like, "Hell, I'll never make another thing."
Yeah.
Liked that.
Yeah. I don't know.
And then there's like the big looming problem for everybody, which is money.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
everyone needs some.
Yeah.
And so like when you're making those calculations about like, how can I make work that's authentic and is, me but how can I pay my bills?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a big puzzle.
It is. And like the people that have that figured out seem to be pretty few and far between.
Oh yeah. Yeah. To hit both of those things at once is really a trick. Mm-hmm. I think I guess it's the people who are like really enjoy commercial work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. For me, it's the day job. So.
I know, I shoot my weddings quietly.
Yeah. But how to get into that state where things are actually moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, especially with writing, I find that it's not that it's never happened. It just hasn't happened in a while. I feel like when I was younger, and not even like a kid or anything, but just because I'm gonna be shit. I can't even remember how old I am. I mean, I'm 37.
That's young.
And I feel like even when I was in like my early 20s or my mid 20s, that like I would always say that when I had something to write, I would end up thinking about it for so long that by the time I actually sat down and wrote it, that it would all just kind of come out. Mm-hmm. But it might take me like 6 months to get to that point.
Yeah.
But like now, I mean, there's like I have a folder in my notes app that is all just like ideas for essays that I want to write, and
Yes.
I literally think about. I don't even need to have written them down because I'm thinking about those essays every day, at least one of them every day, and I haven't forgotten a single one of them. Like I'm still turning them over, and some of them have been in there for like 5 years.
Wow.
And a couple of, like, I sat down to actually write one, the other day, and like I worked on it for like an hour, and I couldn't even get started, and then I ended up writing something entirely other than that. So, which I mean, at least I got something written, but it wasn't the thing that I wanted to write.
That's fascinating. But you wrote something.
Yeah.
Did you like what you wrote?
I think that it was okay. It was. I'm always hoping for something, to be able to write something like that's lyrical and profound. And I think this one was more cute. But it was okay. And I put it out there.
That's good. It's all you can hope for. There's something to be said just for doing the work.
Yeah.
For a while, I had one of my really strange, odd jobs was I would get up at 6 in the morning and I would write a news feed for like, it wasn't Us Weekly or People Magazine, but it was something like that. It was like a celebrity culture magazine. And I would write like the 15 most newsworthy celebrity gossipy stories in the morning, like just compile, really simple, compile 15 stories with links and write a pithy headline. It took me half an hour. The first week it was like a lot of work. But then I started to like get to know all the celebrities and I got to know all my news sources really well so I could do it really quickly. And like I started to really have a lot of fun with like making the headlines. And then I found that like all my other creative work was suddenly a lot more fun. And it was almost like I was like getting all like the junk out in the morning, like just creating these stupid headlines about something I cared nothing about, but it was amusing to me. And somehow it like got me out of a creative rut in other things.
Yeah.
And so as much as I want things to sort of be easy and I gravitate towards the things that are easy, because I think that's where a lot of authenticity is, I think you do have to find those sort of tricks of making yourself do work, either related or unrelated, to get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. It's like a discipline that I come in and out of.
Yeah. I'm terribly undisciplined when it comes to my my creative work. So
yeah. I just feel like I'm disciplined once I have something a little bit that I know is good or has promise. But when it's like you're so just grasping around and nothing you're making is doing it for you, it's so painful to be. It's like, well, and I have talked to authors who are like, I've never written 100 pages and thrown them away. And that is the craziest thing to me. I have written 100 pages and thrown it away like 6-7 times.
Wow. I get so attached to the things that I write. I can't like, I mean, it's hard enough for me to cut out a photo from a series.
Wow.
And I do that. Like I've finally gotten to where, you know, like, okay, yes, I love this picture, but it doesn't work in the series. Let's get rid of it. And I can do that. But like when it comes to writing, for some reason, like, I don't know, it's really hard for me to let go of, like if I wrote 100 pages, like, first of all, I've never written 100 pages. So
I've written a lot of bad pages.
Yeah, I don't know.
That I can't wait to throw away. You know? And like, I've shown them to people, you know, and they're like, what is this? You know, like people, I don't know. I just make weird things sometimes that don't make any sense.
Yeah. It's funny too. Like when I find that with myself, like a lot of times, like when I'm being undisciplined, like what it ends up doing is like, I'll get so, like I'll be thinking about a thing I want to do, whether it's an essay or a series of photographs or whatever, right? And I'll want to do that thing. And I'll be thinking about it, and I'll sit down to start working on it, and then I'll get distracted with something else. Yeah. And then I'll get so distracted with that other thing that I'll end up, like, that's actually how, like one of my books came about, is that like I was trying to work on something just purely photography related, and I just started thinking about bookbinding, like a different bookbinding thing. And then I was like, well, let me like look up how to do that bookbinding. Let me see if I could like, and then I like 6 months later, I had another book and I was like, well, I didn't even mean to do that.
It's amazing. That's what's happening to me now as I'm trying to write another book or a screenplay. And now I'm like being drawn into a photo series.
Yeah.
As like, it's like my procrastination technique.
Yeah. It's kind of oddly, where like on the one hand the you know, it's nice because I actually got something done, but it's also kind of vaguely unsatisfying because it wasn't the thing that I set out to do.
It's kind of terrifying. It's like veering off the road and suddenly you're like at a nice little motel and you're like, I like this motel, but I wanted to be at the hotel, you know? Yeah.
So we've been going a little while now. We probably need to wrap up, but the last question I always ask everyone, as long as I don't forget, which happens sometimes, is whether there is some piece of art or literature or creativity that you've experienced recently that meant something to you.
Yes, but specifically, I think that, well, I'll just be like really specific. We were speaking about like commercial photographers and how I'm sort of in awe of commercial photographers who are like able to push their craft within there. Mm-hmm. And so there's a photographer named Ryan Pfluger who when I was a photo editor at Nerve, he was like one of my go-to guys, and he was still, I think, at SVA at that point. But I just really liked his vibe.
I know that name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll see him a lot in the New York Times Magazine now. He does a lot of celebrity portraits, but he's just like, he does commercial photography, but he's a really earnest person and cares so much about his work. And I think it really comes through. Anyway, so last night he posted this sort of black and white portrait against a skyline, and it was like once in a while you see a picture that's sort of next level and you're like sucking your breath, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I can like think of like 4 or 5 images I've seen like that in the last 6 months where I was like, yeah. Noah Kalina had a picture like this that was like, were birds in a sky that he had like formed into a formation of a woman, but it was really subtle. That picture blew me away. Anyway, so this picture of Ryan Pfluger's last night, sort of like, it was sort of next level good. So I guess that's what I would say. And it was just like a black and white portrait of a man. I think that one of the things that draws me to his work is that he's making like fashion images, but fashion images largely of men or often of men, in a way that has mostly been reserved for making images of women. And I really appreciate it. And they're just like lyrical and technically perfect, and they're just sort of working on a lot of levels. So yeah, he's sort of like mastering his craft in front of me, and I really like to watch it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I had a great time talking to you, so thank you so much.
I did too. Thank you.
Okay. So, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Rachel's book, Hey Harry, Hey Matilda, is available now. You can get it wherever books are sold. I've got a link to the official website for the book in the show notes, so do check that out. And hey, if you buy the book and you like it, make sure and leave a review on Amazon or Goodreads or something like that. Really that goes for any book you like. I know a lot of authors, and they all tell me that that's a big thing you can do to help out. And that is our show. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can send me an email at podcast@keepthechannelopen.com. You can also find me and the show on Facebook at facebook.com/keepthechanneleopen or on Twitter at channeleopenpod. This is a listener-supported show, only made possible by generous donations from you lovely folks out there in podcast land. So if you like what I'm doing here and you want to hear more of it, please check out our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/sakeriver. and consider making a monthly pledge. That's patreon.com/sakeriver, sake like the drink and river like river. Another option for helping out the show is, of course, leaving a review on iTunes, and there's a link in the show notes for that. Our theme music is by Poddington Bear. You can find more of his music available for licensing at soundofpicture.com. Next time our guest will be Kinsey Moreland, who writes the Culture Report for Voice of San Diego. So stay tuned for that, and until then, remember, keep the channel open.